Welcome back. So, production is a word that gets thrown around quite a bit. One of the things that we're going to talk about is that, well, production really has to do a lot with project management in games. So, let's talk about techniques. We're going to start with a process that maybe you've heard before, especially if you have any experience coming from software design or software development or software engineering. So, eventually we want to get to this idea of Scrum or Agile software development. But we need to talk a little bit about where games are coming from, because there's a great deal of history rooted in what's called the waterfall method that games are really drawing on. So why are we concerned about managing projects? Well, we're concerned because the majority of projects don't come in on time and don't meet their goals. We want to deliver a quality project on time and on budget. Well, so why is that so hard? And why is it so hard in particular for games? Well, in order to do that, the idea is that we need to develop some processes to kind of manage how we go about developing games. But as you've already noted, that game design and game development is a very iterative process, right? Finding the fun is difficult, right? If it's hard enough to write a good requirements analysis in software development, how are you going to do it for a video game? So the primary technique that gets used, particularly in software development and historically in games, was this traditional idea of a waterfall. It was phase development, right? You had sort of anticipated results, and you did a lot of upfront design work, did requirements analysis, and right, you could sort of step by step come up with the solution to a problem. But video games aren't really that same sort of thing, right? Even in software development, right? Requirements analyses aren't clear, and the requirements documents may not be clear, right? You have, some people talk about suffering from analysis paralysis, meaning you have too much information. You can't figure out what you need to make the next steps. And ultimately, the requirements for a project change over time. And for games in particular, right? Maybe there's an entirely new subsystem, or wow, there's this really new controller, and so how might we incorporate that, right? So the requirements are shifting right under your feet, and so it becomes really hard to know how to make your thing. And the truth is that projects ultimately take too long, right? A third of projects get delivered on time or on budget, right? And though that long duration, particularly of video game projects, defers revenue. What do I mean by that? That means that you're not making money while that thing is in development. If your game takes 3 years to make, for 3 years, you're running in the red. And anytime you delay, it pushes that out even further, right? So it costs in more than one way. And often what happens is, because of all of those things like testing get thrown out the window, like quality assurance gets squished. How many of you have played games that the first day you get the game, you put the disc in your console, and the first thing it has to do is download an update, right? Yeah, that's because of all of this, right? Because attempting to integrate all those things together late in the cycles of development means that stuff is going to break, right? Things fall apart, the training wheels come off. And that's really problematic for games, right? Games are really bad at it. Time gets wasted on junk, right? 52% of the time, we don't actually implement all of the requirements that a project has. And only 64% of like the functionality of a thing gets used, right? And so we're making use of so much of a small thing, and you've invested all this time in this really cool system that nobody ever touches because they found that the core of the gameplay was somewhere else. And so that's a lot of time and effort that gets wasted. We also have a poor understanding of like where people are in the process of development, right? We don't really have a good intuitive sense of like how much we've gotten done. So the percent task complete really isn't a sufficient measure, right? Like, am I 50% done brushing my teeth? Well, I mean, I'm working on it, we'll get there. And the average amount of overrun that people have when they task estimate is almost half. It's 43%, right? Like, these are really horrible numbers. We're really bad at estimating. And even people who do have a good intuition for it are going to fail at it sometimes. And so the waterfall model, right, doesn't really work. And it particularly doesn't work for games, right? So most waterfall projects are mired in inefficient integration and late discovery of substantial design issues. And they expend roughly 40% or more of their total resources in integration and testing activities. Right? It's not actually even implementing the systems themselves. And so project management typically sort of sees this as a linear progression, right? Like that something is going to get better, but that's not really how it works. And so in particular with the waterfall model, one of the most common failure patterns in software development, and I don't want to say that games are software because they really aren't, right? Games are kind of a unique, interesting thing that has a great deal of art and design that goes into them, but that just makes all of this worse, right? Right? The idea that you're going to specify very specifically at the beginning of a project a thing you don't understand very well at all, right? And so that's what this quote about having a 5 digits of precision version, right? A document, a specification to something you only understand to 1 digit of precision, right? And that's because we haven't explored the design space. And so if it's that bad for traditional software development, how is it for video games? Yeah, that's a really important question, right? So this idea that, right, like software project managers are more likely to succeed if they use techniques similar to those used in movie production compared to if they were using those in traditional software development projects, right? Game development is not software engineering. Game development is not bridge building, right? Even though we have aspects of software engineering, aspects of software development, it's actually a whole lot different than that. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. So, with all that said, what are we going to do? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. See you next time.